Thank you, everybody. Thank you for having this, the volunteers, Carl and Richard and everyone who makes this possible. Yeah. Thank you for giving me the chance to come back. I've really been enjoying myself. Look forward to more conversations. Apparently it's not working. Apparently it's not working. Thank you. Excellent. So messages, I want to exorcise the demon of guilt. Right? Don't feel guilty about eating animal source food. And this, I believe, is in the face of a prevailing narrative that's coming against us. And another version of that I want people to know is that I truly believe when you improve your health, you are improving the world. And part of that is our immediate personal relationships, but it's also, as Dave mentioned earlier, that pivotal patient. Giving somebody the opportunity to learn by watching us, because we never know who's watching. It's really kind of a bizarre time we live in. To those people who are restoring their mental and physical health with a diet containing animal source foods, I beg of you, don't listen to those people that sold you the diet that made you sick in the first place. And they sound like they've got a really, coherent and impressive argument, right? It looks like a stout rope. But if you can take the time to unravel that rope and test each strand, I stand here to tell you that each one of those strands fail. And we can do that on objective evidence, as well as our own personal experience. If you are not aware, how many people had their childhood scarred by this book? There is healing. Frances Moore LePay, 1972, she's still influential, she's still out there, folks are still listening to her. If you don't know this, you can read the title, meat-free, high-protein, whatever. She had this idea that, if you complementary protein sources from plant source food and everything would be wonderful. She was this amalgam of environmentalism and vegetarianism and goodness knows what else. This book is cited as a reference in the Senate subcommittee report. Her charts and graphs show up. She's quoted throughout the document. Sorry. So you just need to know that stuff. This has been co-traveling since the very beginning. You can go back a long time and find these influences. So I'm here to tell you that ruminant animal agriculture is the truly sustainable form of agriculture. It is the most sustainable form of agriculture we can ever hope to have. Lots of reasons for that. I'll touch on a few, happy to talk about more. But unfortunately, the sustainability conversation is unjustly simplified. And I want to expand it, as I say, from grazing to grave, or from pasture to plot, as in funeral. Because we have an unsustainable crisis of chronic illness in our country and globally. And if we're not bringing that into the conversation, we're not having a true conversation about sustainability. If you get in touch with someone who only wants to talk about environmental issues, and it might be better to call those ecological, because ecology is a science, but if they don't consider societal factors as well as economic factors, then you're not having a true conversation. There are people working in this space that try to look at all of that to come up with a more coherent story. And I'm really getting tired of the us versus them, of the wars, of the culture of contempt. We have an outrage industrial complex in this country. It just seems that that's how they get their power and money. And we just need to get to the point, we're in this together. And many of the issues that customers are concerned about, producers are also concerned about. It just might be that they have perspective on those that the consumers aren't aware of. And it would do well for us to listen to them on that. And then it would do well for them to be able to hear what we have for the health-saving message of what we are talking about here. And part of my mission is to get my tribes together and learn from each other and foster that kind of issue. So let's do just a quick review. Eating red meat, they don't make you fat, won't clog your arteries, give you diabetes, cause cancer, kill your kidneys, acidify your blood, or melt your bones. You can probably add to this list. It won't make you morally weak. Thank you, John Harvey Kellogg. As I have shirt envy, by the way. As I said at one presentation, I shouldn't have done this. I looked at somebody in the front row and I specifically said, you might be morally weak, but it won't be because you ate red meat. I repented very quickly, but afterwards he came up and said he was a graduate of Loma Linda. And we can add to this. Ruminant animal, all livestock agriculture does not deprive us of food. It does not drive climate change, nor does it destroy the planet. So those are all things that we can talk about. I think it should be an aspirational goal for all moral human beings to strive against the generation and propagation of unnecessary human suffering and pain. Death is inevitable. I love people who talk about reducing your risk of death. Really? You can do that? God bless you. Death is inevitable, but a life of protracted ill health is not. Chronic diseases, disease prevention and control helps people to live longer and healthier lives. I think that's our great good message. I want to make sure, if I can, that we avoid other messages that will get in the way of people hearing that message. Because basically this is the tragedy. In the United States, 52% of adult Americans are diabetic or pre-diabetic. 60% of adult Americans have one or more chronic illnesses. Only 12% of adult Americans enjoy optimal metabolic health, and the cost of this is bankrupting. $1.7 trillion, equivalent to 9.3% of GDP. By the way, farm gate value, the value of the products produced on America's farms and ranches is 1% of GDP. And the entire food industry, including agriculture, is 5%. So that's the scale of how disordered we are. And gee, could this have something to do with it? Almost 60% of the calories in America's diet are coming from 3 categories. They're coming from grains, added plant lipids, and added sugars and sweeteners. Just those 3 categories. All of plant-sourced food contributes 70%. So the next time somebody bloviates about, we want you to be on a plant-based diet, we already are, and maybe that's the effing problem. It's really important for people to understand that 2 of these 4 represent functional scientific disciplines. Was that harsh? Let me put it another way. I try to tell people, look, consulting veterinarians and dietitians, consulting veterinarians, and consulting animal nutritionists get fired every single day. And not one of them should try to blame the cow. Right? We have hard endpoints. The milk truck comes twice a day, picks up that half day's production. They watch it go up and down. If they're not getting what was predicted, it's not the cow's fault. We can do things in those disciplines that thankfully medicine and human nutrition can't do. That's not a problem, except when they start acting like they are as rigorous as science. And then it gets really bothersome when they start telling us how we should be doing better. Excuse me, you've got enough to take care of. It's sort of like the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee thinking about addressing sustainability. Based on your wonderful performance in what you were charged with doing. But here's the out. This is the amazing thing. Page 6 of the last edition of the Dietary Guidelines says, and I quote, "The Dietary Guidelines is not intended to be used to treat disease." Golden! What they say, this is my interpretation of the logic. I'm only an agronomist. But it seems like what they're saying is eat this way, you won't get sick. But if you get sick, don't eat this way. Cool. So for the 12% of adult Americans you haven't made sick yet, go ahead, follow the guidelines. For everybody else, you might want to find a different way because they admit, okay? Now, this may be a little controversial, but I'm of the opinion that if you can't get it from animal source foods, you don't need it. Now, if you can eat them and you enjoy them, great, wonderful, knock yourself out. As far as I'm concerned, there's only 2 valid uses for kale. One is as garnish, and the second is as a forage crop. But in the course of our journey over the last couple decades, we've lost sight of the fact that animal source food are superior to plant source food in human nutrition. This should not be controversial, unfortunately it is. And we have people working in other parts of the world that will say with full confidence that animal source food in the diet is absolutely essential for the proper development of a human being. You cannot supplement for a lack. And we have a challenge coming at us in the next 31 years, 2050, of an additional 2 billion people or 1.5 billion. They're calling for an increase in food production, doubling essentially, talking about increasing animal protein or the demand for animal protein increasing by 2/3, and they say it's got to happen from the same land. We could argue with all those points. One of the things to keep in mind, of course, is that we waste a great deal of food. And so 40% of the food never gets eaten. So that needs to be changed. But what's interesting is the categories with the greatest loss from production through consumption are those foods we're being told to eat more of. You know, those fresh veggies and fruits that we're supposed to have 5 a day of. So when they do their calculations, they're not including this in their estimate of environmental impact. So not only would they have to produce more to make up for the animal source food that they want to take out, they'd have to add more because less ends up getting eaten. I think there's a problem with that. They don't look at it. But the problem is this contagion that this dietary delusion has released on the world has thoroughly infested my disciplines. This is a document that came out of the International Livestock Research Institute. It's an international FAO organization based in Kenya. Says the great story of livestock agriculture, how it contributes to food supply, right? It contributes to nutrition security. It boosts sustainable crop production. We can talk about that if you'd like. It actually is a way for poor people to become elevated because it's a generation of new wealth. And then, after they've said all this, there's the obligatory black box warning that talks about the hazards of overconsumption and the hazards of saturated fat and the hazards of the consumption of processed meat. Male bovine fecal matter. And you have to watch their language because you might think you're agreeing with them. Like you hear the phrase nutrient dense. And if you don't think about that, you might agree with it. And I've heard people within this community say that, and I hope I know what they mean, but it has an official definition. And per the dietary guidelines themselves, nutrient dense is explicitly low fat because they don't consider fat a nutrient. Therefore, it can only dilute the essential plant antioxidants that come in those healthy rainbow. And if you don't know that, you might agree with them. And if you agree with them, good luck to you. So here's a statement: suboptimal diet is responsible for more deaths than any other risk factors globally. Okay. What do you mean by that? Oh, non-optimal intake of 3 dietary factors, a lack of whole grains, fruits, and too much sodium accounted for more than 50% of deaths. Okay, let me spend a little time here and look at their data in quotes. This is all model projection, of course. They just take their risk factors and they apply them to population numbers. But if you look, I'm told there's a pointer here. Good, excellent. So here's this diet high in sodium. By God, that's killing all of us. Apparently, here's your healthy holy whole grains here. That's pretty massive. Apparently, we've been turned into ruminants because diets too low in fiber are killing a bunch of us. Look down here, though. Diets high in sugar-sweetened beverages. That's higher than too much red meat. They're not even consistent. And what do they think is the biggest cause of type 2 diabetes? Too much sodium. That's probably not fair. Sorry. Too little whole grains. Too little nuts and seeds. I just, the mind boggles. And this stuff gets in the way of doing good work overseas. What we've done now is a form of imperialism overseas. So Skippy the Wonder Dog is confused. So we've all had our own sort of red pill moment, right? Well, you know, take the blue pill and you'll continue to believe your received narratives and worldviews regarding diet, health, nutrition, agriculture, and the environment. A life of diminished vitality, chronic illness, and medication. Or take the red pill, enter the world of true lifestyle medicine, and we will show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. A life of new possibilities awaits you and billions of others. So, I'm probably running way too long. This is what livestock is. So, let's just say some, whatever amount of animal source food you're going to eat, great. People say that if we didn't have livestock agriculture, we could feed whatever, right? What we need to understand is that most of the feed that's consumed by livestock globally is not human utilizable. This is all livestock. And it's roughly 86% is not human utilizable. Now, drill down into it a little bit more. We've got monogastrics and we've got ruminants. I'm a ruminant guy. I'm the sod father of the ruminati. I'm looking for more members. Carl and I will teach you the handshake, not the milkshake. The difference, if you just start with the macronutrients that make up the diet, monogastrics, like us, our diets are typically composed of macronutrients like carbohydrates, fats, proteins. There are essential amino acids in a monogastric's diet. There are essential fatty acids in a monogastric's diet. There's no such thing, as we know, an essential carbohydrate in a monogastric's diet. Ruminants, because they have this massive anaerobic fermentation fat in front of the rest of a digestive system that looks much like ours, their diets are carbohydrate and nitrogenous material, sometimes called crude protein. We'll get back to that. So there is no essential amino acid in a ruminant's diet. There's no such thing as an essential fatty acid in a ruminant's diet. There are two forms of carbohydrate that are essential to a ruminant. They have to have both fiber and non-fibrous carbohydrates. And it's a matter of balance and getting that right. Okay? So by the time the digesta in a cow gets to its small intestine, there's no glucose to absorb. They run on the volatile fatty acids that they absorb and then the products of gluconeogenesis. So there are these essential functions that ruminant animals perform. They are absolutely essential. It is impossible for Beyond to substitute for what ruminants do to maintain the ecosystems. And by the way, they're in every ecosystem that man has colonized, and man has domesticated ruminants in every one of those. So we could go down through this. Again, one of the great tricks of ruminant animals is that they turn carbohydrates into fat for us instead of us, which I think is a great deal. They also take non-protein nitrogen and poor quality plant protein and upcycle it into animal source protein that's of incredible importance to us, number of other functions. But because of that fermentation process, I want people to start thinking, I have a new campaign here. You know how fermented products are all the rage now for health food. So I want people to understand that meat from ruminants is a fermented plant product. And I think it qualifies as true health food. How about you? Yeah. So for the next time that somebody talks to you about how many pounds of this it takes to make a pound of that, please remember that with a ruminant, the vast majority of what it eats is not utilizable by humans. And if you can drill down just to what is edible by humans, you find that they're actually more efficient than monogastrics. So if we're really concerned about increasing, as we should be, the quantity and quality of the food supply for humanity, let's pay attention to that. And y'all don't even know how to properly talk about protein. It really is amazing. You look at a label, you look at a food table, and what's listed is crude protein. That's total nitrogen percent in the sample multiplied by 6.25 because we assume that all the nitrogen that was there was in protein, and all that protein was 16% nitrogen. In swine nutrition, for well over a generation, we balance rations to the essential amino acid level. We'll wait for you to catch up. But in this case, this is one of the scandals in today's world, that for the poorest 20% of the tropical population around the world, rice provides more protein per person than beans, meat, or milk. But see, they're talking crude protein, because that's all they know to look at. And if you drill down and for example, you look at lysine, which is an essential limiting amino acid, it's going to take you roughly 1.7 pounds of cooked rice to give you the lysine you could get from a quarter pound of beef. So we best be factoring that into our models when we start talking about replacing, right? By the way, that would be about 1,500 calories and only 205 grams of carbohydrate. So, you know, people talk about how much agricultural land there is and how much of it supports, you know, livestock, and if we could just take that and put it into crops, you know, we could feed all these people. Here's an exercise for you. Okay, this 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. That's the Earth's surface, total Earth surface. Fold it once, fold it twice. This is now the dry land surface. God, I hope I left this in my pocket. I did, good boy. This is the agricultural land surface, okay? Tear that into 1/3, 2/3, this is the bit we can cultivate to produce those healthy vegetables and fruit and grains. This is called marginal. This is the stuff that ruminants can produce high quality animal source food from globally, okay? When people say how much land is to livestock, they are consciously or unconsciously conflating agricultural land with cropland. They're not the same thing. This happens to be a picture. Thank you very much for the gift of sharing your pictures, Doug. This is Sand Hills in Nebraska. This is land that should never be tilled. Best use for it is grass, producing meat. And for much of the world, that's exactly what I explained. There's only so many things you can do to produce food from that land. Now, we can grow crops that can be directly utilized by those people who try to do that, but notice where the essential food's coming from, and also notice that when we produce these crops, we produce a heck of a lot of byproducts. That's a waste, except we can feed them to ruminants, and we can turn them into T-bone. Win. Okay, we can also utilize non-protein nitrogen, which I mentioned. There's an issue of nutrient cycling. Ruminants remove far less nutrients from the soil than do the crops. And again, this is now drilling down. I said before it was about 86% of the feed that livestock consume. It's like 95% for ruminants globally is inedible by humans. And if you drill into that 4% slice at the top, a quarter of that, so 1%, was inedible due to grade problems. So it's more like 96% of what the world's ruminants eat is not human edible. And it represents 10% of the global cereal production. So again, when somebody says the truth is just a little different. Now you might prefer to not eat grain, corn finished beef. I just like to make sure you know what in fact that is. This is what an animal eats for the last 4 months of its life if it goes to a feed yard. The picture closest to me is the ration that they consume when they first get there. The one furthest away, when it's about 50 or 60% dry matter coming from corn, is the last stage prior to slaughter. So when they say corn fed, they're eating a lot more than just corn. And I've heard people with strange visions of what that looked like. All of life on Earth is this cycling of CO2 from the atmosphere via photosynthesis into carbohydrate, right? With me? Right. Excellent, thank you. Lights are glaring. I didn't know if you'd all gone out for more bacon. Autotrophic organisms, right? They don't need to consume. They can make organic compounds out of inorganic compounds. Heterotrophs like us, we must consume other organisms in order to get our nutrition. One of the features of ruminant animal agriculture is the use of perennial plants. The root system of a perennial plant, by design, puts more of that carbohydrate into the ground, building up organic matter in the soil, and that's a good thing. But remember that when that methane does come off from the belching, well, we'll get to that, sorry. The great thing really about grass is it evolved under grazing, remarkable. Apparently ancient man and dinosaurs didn't have like mowers. Who knew? And so this was a family of plants that developed the ability to survive repeated close defoliation. And when you do it with an appropriate rest period, the rooting system ends up developing to the same extent it would had you never cut it or grazed it. And then we find that when we cut something, we don't have as beneficial effect as we do when we graze it. There's a different interaction going on. Soil health is a big topic. We've been focusing too much on the carbon cycle. The water cycle is going to be far more important going forward, but there's very little funding, very little buzz about it. This is just a demonstration of something called water-stable structure in the soil, and when you have something green and growing on it like grass for a long period of time, you have the stable structure that you see in the column closest to me, as opposed to the one that comes from a field where you're producing corn or grain or those crops that people say we should be eating more of. And in fact, it only takes 25 minutes for that one clump to completely dissolve. And so that soil would accept less water, there'd be more runoff, there'd be more pollution, there'd be more erosion. Certain issues have become far more popular than they deserve to be. First of all, we should all know it's belches, not farts. You're welcome. And the numbers that they give aren't even right. The best estimates for the anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions in the United States from all of agriculture is 9%. From livestock agriculture, it's 4%. Okay, transportation is like 28%. Now, somebody help me with the math. 9 minus 4 is what? Thank you, I'm only an agronomist. Okay, so that means that today plant agriculture produces more greenhouse gas emissions than all of livestock agriculture, and beef is only 2%. That seems kind of awkward to me, and if you drill into it and you look, you just find stuff that just makes you go, Skippy comes back to mind. If someone were to eat twice the current daily consumption of beef, it would be less life cycle emissions from that beef than the tailpipe emissions from driving a car only 2,700 miles that gets 25 miles per gallon a year. Okay? And what you have to understand is the methane that's coming off the cow is a cycling of CO2 as opposed to this tailpipe emission, which is an enrichment of CO2. And I did mention that methane oxidizes back to CO2 within about 10 years. So their models have been wrong. We're learning more all the time, but it keeps coming up. If we were to eliminate all livestock agriculture in the United States, it's not nothing, but it's really, if we got rid of everything, it would be 2.6% less in the United States, 0.36% less globally. But it would come at the cost of unbalancing the food ecosystem and creating essential dietary nutrition. Deficient. Really? That doesn't. Oh, and by the way, 2 points. The animals don't get to hang around. Right? So we're getting rid of the animals to do this. Why don't they talk about the horses? Oh, maybe because that would hurt fundraising? Yeah, so red pill. And we're learning enough now that as we learn more in the near future, most likely we're going to find that cattle are carbon neutral to negative. Here's one study just recently published. They looked at feedlot finishing versus grass finishing, upper Midwest, and they had a specific grazing management protocol. When they compared the grass finishing phase to the feedlot finishing phase, they found that the emissions in the feedlot phase were less than those in the grass finishing phase. So if one of your justifications is that grass finished beef produces less emissions, again, I'm sorry, but the facts aren't with you. And if you like grass finished beef, I'm all for you, but just don't use that as the reason, because somebody will call you on it. But the cool thing was that under that grazing management, they sequestered more than enough soil carbon to more than offset the emissions from that grass finishing phase. Okay? Which probably means that if we were to look at the entire life cycle, the whole life cycle would be negative. And then the other point that you need to know is that this happened on some previously depleted crop ground. We've been running down our agricultural land resources ever since we started tilling. Tilling has an inevitable consequence of oxidizing soil organic matter. So in any case, there are things that also benefit society from when we produce livestock, in this case cattle. These we call ecosystem services, and even today, with our conservative estimation, we come up with a positive number per pound, and of course the rancher is not compensated for that. It's just benefits to wildlife, benefits to watersheds. If we do a better job managing our grasslands, we reduce fire hazards, all these sorts of things. And this is before, that's bothersome, oh, you can't see that. We haven't yet begun to look at that $1.7 trillion of cost from healthcare. And when I go talking to them about why don't we do that, they point to the Einsteins that think that a diet too low in fiber or too high in sodium is the chief reason for diabetes and heart disease. So we really have to get this sorted. Quick review, because I'm probably way too long. And this, I was going to make a comment about, needing glasses to read that, but it's very small. Humans are heterotrophs. We have to consume other organisms. It's just the way it is. Get used to it. Deal with it. Or grow up. Did I say that? Good, the microphone is off. Animal products animal source foods are superior to plant source foods in human nutrition. Ruminant animal agriculture has these unique ecological advantages that we need to become more appreciative of. There can be no sustainable agriculture without ruminants. Livestock agriculture produces currently about 60% of the world's fertilizer supply. So when you get rid of that, what are you going to replace it with? Oh, fertilizer made from petrochemicals. Great. No problems there. Ruminants are not competing with human for resources, for food. In fact, they increase the quantity and quality of humanity's food supply. Ruminants increase, there we go. Modern humans exist because of ruminants. Modern societies depend upon them, and they will be essential to the future of humanity. Estimates of ruminant animal agriculture's environmental impact are typically overstated, oversimplified, and misleading, and they are conflated with the message about the health hazards. That's how they do this game, okay? So don't listen to them. Listen to your doctor. Now, I'm only qualified to tell you how much fertilizer to put on your pasture, right? I've been preceded and will be followed by real doctors. That's a joke. I mean, I am a doctor, but I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. But if you are restoring your health, please don't listen to someone who doesn't place appropriate value on that. You can tell when idols are being worshipped. Human beings get sacrificed. You can find me. I'll be here for a while. I'm not hard to find on social media. Thank you for your attention. And thank you for being part of this revolution.